afternoon and welcome to Washington Unplugged. President Obama meets with his cabinet this weekend for a 6-month review. Across town, members of the House head out for a month-long summer recess without health care legislation. The Senate has one more week to work on their plans, but the outlook is bleak. What's the state of the nation and the administration 6 months in? Joining me today from the White House is administration spokesman Bill Burton. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
So the House is not passing a health care bill, nor is the Senate. In fact, the key Senate committee says they won't have a bill until after the recess. The president wanted bills. Are you guys disappointed?
I know that people often focus on what's not happening, but if you look at all the progress that we've made and continue to make, we're very encouraged with what's happened so far. Today, there's action in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Republicans and Democrats both say that we're continuing to make progress in the Senate Finance Committee. And if you look at what the House has passed, what the Help Committee has passed on the Senate side, there's a lot of agreement on what we need to do moving forward on costs, on coverage, on choice, all while remaining deficit neutral. And we feel like we've got the folks at the table that we need to make the best possible healthcare reform that we can make, and we're continuing to make progress.
Progress, but it's slower than you'd hoped, and it's still slow. What do you think accounts for the slowing of the progress that once had led the president to believe he could get 2 bills by August?
Well, for starters, this is a very hard thing. We're taking on and making more progress than has been made on healthcare reform in the last 60 years. So we feel good about how much has been done already. We've already gotten doctors and nurses and hospitals. Even the AARP is on board, which is, these are some folks who were not on board the last time we tried to get healthcare reform through. So we feel good that we're moving forward with some speed, and Congress is acting urgently on what is a very important reform for the American people.
There were a slew of polls out this week, as you very well know, and one thing that's got to be troubling for you is on the question of health care. The president has talked a great deal about this issue. He's really put all of his capital on the line. But if you look inside all of these polls and you ask people about his approval ratings on the specific question of health care, it appears that the more he speaks, the worse his standing is. How do you account for that?
I don't know that I would characterize it in exactly that same way. There's broad agreement among the American people, from Democrats to Republicans to independents, that we need health care reform. Now, when you get into the nitty-gritty and you get Congress involved in the very intense and contentious negotiations, there's going to be some skepticism. There's going to be some concern about what we're going to do moving forward. But we're confident that with the support of the American people so strongly behind health care reform, that we're going to be able to get something done on their behalf.
In the president's interview with Karen Tumulty of Time magazine, he expressed some frustration with how to frame and talk about this issue. He says, when I look at the numbers, it looks like a mess. He seemed to be sort of suggesting that the American people don't know how bad things are. Did you guys misread where people were in terms of the state of the crisis?
No, not at all. I think the reason that there's so much broad support for healthcare reform is because it is a crisis. And when you look at the way costs have skyrocketed, 3 times the rate of wages, twice the rate of inflation over the course of the last 10 years, when you look out towards the next 20 years, if we don't do something right now in order to stop the cost from rising so quickly, then we're not going to be able to stop the crisis that this is for American families and businesses and the American government, and what the costs for Medicare and Medicaid are. So this is a crisis. The American people know that we need to do something to act to stem the costs and make sure more folks get covered, all while making sure that people have a choice. So no, I don't think that there was any misreading. What I think is that we're taking on a very big, tough thing, and we're making some good progress.
One of the charges is that if there was a misreading, and I take your point, but if there was a misreading, what happened is that people who already have insurance think, gee, what's in this for me? And the president seemed to be addressing that issue this week as he talked about all of the goodies in his health reform for those people who already have insurance. Do you accept the idea that he's got to talk more now to people who have insurance about the good things they're going to get, because there's been too much focus on cutting and costs and sacrifice?
Well, there are a lot of pieces of this that people do need to know about. And one part of it is what's out there for people who already have health insurance. The majority of folks do have health insurance. And so this is a matter of making sure that their costs come down and their outcomes are better and their coverage is a little more efficient than it's been. And so things like making sure that you're not stopped from getting health care because you have a pre-existing condition, capping the premiums and deductibles that you pay, and all the different things that we think will help improve healthcare for Americans who already have it are important parts of the package. But it's one part of comprehensive reform that we think that we continue to move forward on.
You once worried that if this dribbled into August without some passage of legislation in either house, that it would get nibbled to death over the August recess. You still worried about that?
Well, I wouldn't say that we necessarily worried about that per se. What we just want to make sure is that there's some urgency, that we continue to move our feet on health reform, and that's exactly what's happening. Members are going to go home this August. The president's going to go around the country some this August, and everybody's going to hear from the American people how important this issue is, the questions that they've got, and try to continue to make some progress here. So we feel like we go to August in a good position, closer to health reform than we've been in the last 6 decades, and we're confident that Congress is going to come back in the fall ready to get to work.
One last question, Bill. The president's going to meet with everybody over this weekend to do a 6-month review. Tell me what that's going to be like briefly. Is this a pep talk? Is it a we've got to fix some things? What's going to happen?
It's a check-in. Every president since Eisenhower's done it at about 6 months. And so the president's going to check in with his cabinet, some of his key advisors, and they're going to talk about what's going right, what could be going better, and hopefully have a little fun along the way.
All right, Bill Burton, thanks very much for joining us from that very warm White House lawn. Good luck tomorrow.
Thanks,
now
John.
I'm going to turn to CBS News Chief White House correspondent Chip Reed, who has been listening in, standing there next to Mr. Burton on the White House lawn. And Chip is going to help us take a look at what Mr. Burton said, what we can see if we can separate the spin from the reality. Hello there, Chip.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, what struck you if I mean, these poll numbers are quite bad for the president right now, despite what Mr. Burton said. What struck you about what he said?
Well, I think one thing, the first thing you talked about is all the delay on Capitol Hill. And it certainly is true that maybe in the end, the way the sausage making happens on Capitol Hill, you never know what's going to happen. But it's not just delay. There is a reason the president wanted to get these initial bills passed on both the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate before August recess. He wanted momentum, and he didn't want to just open everything up over August recess and allow everything to be back on the table. And that's what happens when you don't really have a bill. So it just makes things much more difficult. There are many more pieces that you have to put back together in the fall when they come back. So it's not just delay. It really does potentially change the game over August and make it more difficult to get the kind of health care reform that the president wants.
So given that the game has changed, what are their plans for trying to stay on this fragile August when everybody goes back home?
Well, I think they're going to be working harder over August than maybe they thought. Now, certainly they weren't just going to take the time off anyway, but we are now on a pretty regular basis hearing about more town halls, more events that the president's scheduling, and of course they're urging members of Congress to be doing the same thing in their districts and really be talking up health care. But the problem is, if you don't have a particular bill, what do you talk up? Do you talk up public option? Do you talk up the co-op idea, or somewhere in between? It's all so vague. It's very easy for people to attack the plan, but it's very difficult to defend it because there is no specific plan.
Well, exactly. And you've been listening to the president try and sell this very closely for the last many months. How have you seen his, and how do you expect his argument to change, or will it not change at all in this August period?
I don't think it's going to change a lot. I think that you pinpointed one thing. They are focusing a bit more now. They always have focused on people who already have health insurance and are happy with it, but they're focusing more on that now because the numbers are pretty overwhelming. The percentage of people, it's somewhere around 75–80%. Who have health insurance and say they're basically pretty satisfied with it. If you don't have them on board, you don't pass health care. That's all there is to it. If you don't convince them that it's going to bring down their long-term costs, you don't pass health care. And if they think that they're going to have to change doctors or lose access, you're not going to pass health care. So that's one thing. He certainly is going to have to increase the focus, I think, even more on people who have health care and are pretty satisfied with their plans right now. But he also is going to have to perhaps get more specific on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of people up there saying we want more specifics because, for the reason we just talked about, it's difficult to defend a bill if you don't know what it is. And if the president isn't in there saying, here's what my plan is, then it's difficult to say what the plan is. So At some point, he's going to have to weigh in with specifics. Now, the argument here is that if the president goes up there and says, here's exactly what I want, then it will just put a big target there, and it will make it easy for everybody to focus all their attention on killing that one specific way of going about this. And they would rather sit back. They believe, let's face it, Rahm Emanuel is one of the most brilliant political strategists in town, and he certainly has a big role in this. He and the president believe that the best way to do this is to let Congress make a lot of the decisions. If he goes up there and says, here's what I want, well, a lot of people in Congress take pride in shooting it down when they're told what they have to do and they're force-fed a program. And they have determined the best way to do this is to lay back a little and let Congress fill in the blanks. But a lot of people also disagree with that and believe at some point he's going to have to fill in those blanks.
Final question, Chip, quickly, are these poll numbers this week? The president's approval rating is down to sort of mortal levels, and particularly on health care. People disapprove in some polls more than they approve of the way he's handled it. How do they see those numbers over at the White House?
Well, I think they're concerned, but I think Bill basically was telling you how they really do feel, that they're not terribly concerned because they really do believe that in the end there is going to be a health care bill. It's probably not going to be the whole kit and caboodle. It's not going to be everything they want, but there is going to be some health care bill. They believe it's going to be signed into law. It may just be on a partisan basis, but they believe that when that happens, those polls will inch up again. And they really do have this very positive view of the future here. And I'm sure it's cause for concern, but I don't think they're surprised by it. They have said all along they did expect those poll numbers to go down, but they expect them to come up on the other side when the economy improves and when they pass a health care bill, which of course is a big if.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chip.
You bet, John.
This is Washington Unplugged. As always, you can see us at 12:30 p.m. on CBSNews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great weekend, or recess.